Hey everybody, welcome back for another sublimation tutorial. Today we're going to look at how we make those designer tumblers with the chains on them. They're really cute, really fun to make. It's a really simple process, and I'll go ahead and walk you through the steps of how to do that. The first thing I'll show you is what materials you're going to need. The first thing you're going to need is your tumbler. I get mine from Amazon. I'll link it down below for you. The next you'll need is your printed image. I use Sawgrass Sublimation Paper with the Hippoo Ink. It comes out with really good results using both of those. You want to print it out. My size is usually a 9.33 by an 8. It just kind of depends on your tumbler. Always measure your tumblers because they are all different. When you print, make sure it's mirrored. That way you don't end up with a backwards image on your tumbler. The next thing we're going to need is some tape, heat resistant tape and painter's tape. I use painter's tape. You don't have to if you don't want to, but that works for me. Some scissors, something to cut paper with. Measuring ruler, you don't necessarily need it, but I use it when I'm cutting my image. A scraping tool, your chains and your buttons, and I'll show you how to attach those. And then you will need this. It's the JB Weld Clear Weld. It sets fairly quick, but it does have a curing time of about 12 to 24 hours. So once it's set, you're gonna let it sit overnight. So it is a little bit longer until you can use it, but it turns out a really good product. So the first step we're gonna do is go ahead and cut out our image. I like to cut off one of the sides and the top, making sure that you cut perfectly along this line. If you cut it too much in, you're going to be too short. If you cut it too much with the white side still attached, you're going to end up having a seam, and we don't want to do that. So I'll go ahead and get mine cut. All right, so now that we have our image all cleaned up, there is a really quick trick that I want to show you for when you're measuring your tumblers. It helps prevent having issues later on, especially when you're done cooking it and it comes up short. If you take your tumbler and lay it down on your image and wrap your image around it backwards so the image is outside, lay the flap with the white border down first and then pull your other layer over and then just kind of make sure everything's lined up. And with this, you can actually see a lot better that if your image is long enough. So you can see when I flap it over, there's going to be no seam. It's just going to be nice and smooth. No white line will be down it. If it's too short, it's going to kind of look like that. And if it's overlapped, it's just going to be way too much folded over. So that's really just a quick trick to make sure you have a right-sized image that'll wrap all the way around properly. So the next thing you want to do is wipe your tumbler down really well. Just make sure to get any oil, any fingerprints, anything like that off of it. You can use the rubbing alcohol if you want to get it off. I don't. I just wipe it down really well and then try not to touch it once you get going. So we'll take our tumbler, lay it down, fold your side without the flap over first, and then you'll take your flap side with the border and pull it over. And at this time, I don't pull it super tight because I'm gonna make sure that my image is lined up on the bottom, which is why I leave a little bit long there. You can see right here, the image is definitely not lined up, and that's a good indication trick to make sure that your image will line up. You can go ahead and kind of just readjust it a little bit, like that. And now you can see that the image is much more lined up and it's not gonna be off or as off as it would have been. So just kind of be aware of that. On this side, my tumbler is completely flush with my image, and there's just a little overhang on the bottom. So at this point, we're gonna pull our tumbler as tight as we possibly can now. And that's gonna ensure that our image is gonna be properly lined up and you're not gonna have any seams or issues later on. So now that's nice and pulled. Again, you just wanna check your line. It's a little off, so again, you can go ahead and put it back and fix it until you're happy with it. And once you're happy with it, just re-pull it just to make sure it's really nice and tight again. so now that you have it as tight as you need, it's lined up, we're gonna go ahead and put the tape on. And I use the heat resistant tape first. Okay, so one little piece is gonna be right in the middle, and then we'll do two other small pieces as well. Again, just double check, make sure it's nice and pulled tight. Hold your flap over, put your tape on the flap, and then hold the tape and pull towards you as tight as you can. And that's just gonna ensure that everything's really tight and held down really well. And then you're gonna put two more pieces right on the rim and then one on the bottom here. All right, so now that you have that down, we're gonna go ahead and do the seam line. And again, same thing, just make sure everything's really tight and laid down over properly. And then I will go ahead and fold my end. It just helps later on when you're trying to remove it. I'll go ahead and take my tumbler, and then I lay my tape down on the flap side first and not this, the second layer yet. And make sure it's down nice. And then again, just pulling tight to make sure it's all smooth and even. And then making sure there's no wrinkles or little bubbles as well. And just kind of go down the seam and take your time. Okay, so we got that there. Just kind of really rub it, make sure everything's good and flat. You see no lines, no bubbles, it's just really flat. At this time, there's a thing called a nail trick that people talk about often if you've heard it. It's just taking your nail, and there's a seam right here, you'll feel a little ridge, and you just take your nail and go all up and down it really, really well. You'll notice that it really defines the seam, and that's gonna help lay the image down a lot better. And then you'll turn it over, and there's also another one kind of overlapped right here. People miss this one, but you also do want to do that one as well. Be a little bit more gentle with it because you are just rubbing all along the tape at this time. Right there you can rub a little harder, but you just don't want to put any holes or tears in your tape. All right, so now we're gonna go ahead and take our heat resistant tape again. This part we're gonna wrap the rim and the bottom. You don't have to, but I like to. It's just an extra protection to make sure everything's nice and tight. This time I don't take my piece off the roll, I just leave it there, line it up with the top of the rim, and then roll my tumbler as I'm pulling this and laying it down nice and tight. Okay, and then you'll do the same thing for the bottom here. When you're doing this, you want to make sure that you're staying with the line with the bottom of the tumbler, not the paper, because you don't actually want to fold your paper in. I'll leave it straight because when you fold the paper, that actually creates air pockets, and so your image is going to have those white spots that are kind of missing when your image is done. Okay, so we're done with the heat resistant tape. Be careful that you're not wrinkling your bottom, but go and kind of make sure everything's really smooth also. I'll do that on the top and the bottom really well, and then rub my finger up and along the seam of the tape right here, and then just kind of re-burnish with my nail along the seam line. Honestly, I do this a few times throughout the process just to make sure it's nice and tight there. So the next step, I use my painter's tape. Again, you don't have to, but I feel it adds a little extra protection, because otherwise the heat resistant tape actually starts to peel up in the oven, or the convection oven, which is what I use. The press, it might be a little bit different because it's having more force on it, but I just feel like I get a really good results doing it this way. So we'll do one line along the seam and then borders as well. Okay, so now that we have those put on, we'll go ahead and again with your nail, making sure everything's really down really tight, to make sure we're getting a really good result in the end. Okay, so at this time, you can go ahead and use your scraper if you'd like. Just make sure everything's really scraped out, just like that. This is kind of how mine look at the end of wrapping. Actually works really good. There is a full, more in detailed tutorial where I show it again, but it's a little bit longer, more detailed, and why I do certain things. But you can watch that if you'd like, but that's the majority of how I do it. So I'll go ahead and finish scraping this, and then we'll move on to cooking the tumbler. All right, so now we're gonna go ahead and bake our tumbler. Like I said, I do like to use a convection oven. I can do multiple at a time. I can stand them up, lay them down, however I feel like doing them. But whatever works for you, if you want to do it in a convection oven or a press, whatever gets you the best results. You do want to make sure that you have an internal thermometer to make sure your temperature is the right temperature. Otherwise, you're going to be undercooking or overcooking, and we don't want to do that. So I have my oven set for 350. We're going to do 5 minutes total, rotating a quarter turn at every single minute. So once it gets down to 5 minutes, we'll go ahead and get that going. Alright, so we'll go ahead and flip our tumbler. You do want to make sure that you're using a heat resistant glove to do so. And 1/4 turn. Alright, so we are all finished. That was 5 minutes, rotating every turn, every quarter turn. So I just kind of want to show a couple things. This is why I add the painter's tape, because it starts to lift up the more heat it gets. And then also, you'll notice the ink starting to come through. That usually means a good thing that you cooked it long enough. So we're going to let that cool off a little bit, and then we'll get it unwrapped. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and start untaping it. And again, this is why I have the tape sides. It's just easier to pull off when you're all done, instead of trying to hold it and peel it off and burning your fingers. But make sure you're also having a heat resistant glove when you are doing this, unless you let it cool all the way off. For me, I generally don't, but it's whatever you want to do. Alright, so I'll get all these peeled off. Unfold it. And those are the looks after it's been done. You can see the colors are really nice, the rims are good, the bottom's good, and if it's not too hot, you have a clear seam, and it just comes out really well doing it all that way. So now we'll go ahead and show you how to put the buttons on with the chain over it. All right, so we got that made. We have our designer tumbler all set and ready to go. You can see the rim, the bottom looks really good, the seam looks really good. So we're gonna go ahead and get our buttons on and our chain, and we'll show you how to do that. So what you're gonna need for this part is your 2 little buttons. I'll put a link down below what I use for my buttons and my chain. It comes in a little box like this. You won't need the screws, you'll just need the little buttons out of it. And then the chains come in a little bag like this, and it looks like this. And there are different colors. This is just the one that usually matches my tumblers pretty well. So that's the one I use. You'll need a little ruler, some kind of marker, and then also, again, this is the JB Weld, clear weld, and this is what's gonna hold your buttons on for you. So before we put anything on, I always like to measure where I'm gonna put them on, because you don't want one like way down here, one way up here, and then it's just gonna look all weird. But you also don't want either of them too low, because then your chain won't fold over. And then it's just gonna be in the way. You won't be able to get your lid off easily. So you just wanna be kind of careful with where you're placing your buttons. So what I do is I go ahead and take my button, I place it about where I want it. So say about right there. Again, it's not completely at the top, but it's pretty darn close. And then I'm actually gonna go ahead and put a dot where I'm gonna place it. And again, this is a Sharpie marker. I'm gonna put a dot where I'm placing it, so it doesn't really matter that there's a dot there because it's gonna be covered up. I want mine right in the middle of that lap right there. So just a dot. And then for the reason I have the ruler is because I want to make sure that that's going to be the same height, and I'm going to measure how far that dot is down. So yeah, I like doing it that way better. So the fourth line up there, so I'm going to go right about there, and I want that in the same exact spot. Okay, so I got my little dot there, and just kind of look at it, make sure it looks like it's going to be in the same spot, and that looks pretty good. I'm just gonna make it a little bit bigger so I don't miss it. All right, and then from there, this is where you're gonna use your bonding material. You're just gonna put a little dab on there. You don't wanna make it so much where it's gonna squish out. Otherwise, you're just gonna have a really big mess. I like to go ahead and actually put mine on here, because you can see there's a little hole in there. And it'll just kind of fill that in, and then it'll squish out enough to seal it on. So we'll go ahead and do that. This stuff is pretty runny. Some of them come with a mixing tip, which is awesome. So I like to use that. Once you've used the mixing tip though, it's kind of useless at that time. So we'll go ahead and just squirt this in. It'll fill up. Just like that. And if you put too much on, you can wipe it off. Just be careful because it is quite gooey and it does run a little bit. So I think there's a little bit too much on there, so I'm just gonna wipe a little bit off. Just like that. And then you're gonna go and make sure you center it onto that dot that you just put on there. And this does take about 5 minutes to cure, to set up. So get it on there and then just let it stay on there. You don't want to be messing with it once you've gotten it placed, because otherwise it's not going to stay on. So I go ahead and do mine just like that. And then I will let that set for the 5 minutes because I don't want it moving. All right, so that's pretty good and on there. Again, it is still setting up, and it's gonna take a little time to really make sure it's set up on there, but it's to the point where we can actually turn it over and put our other button on. For this part, I don't want this directly laying on the table, so I usually have it kind of propped up a little bit. That way it's still just kind of hanging there and you're not touching it. So if you have one of those foam holders, those probably work a little bit better, but I just use my little tape holder and it works pretty well. So we'll go ahead and just squeeze out a little bit more. All right, so since that's already set up quite a bit, I'm gonna go ahead and just put it down on the mat here. You can also just squish it out if you don't have one of those tubes. And then you'll just have to mix it. So pull that back in so it's not continuing to mix. I have a little mixer here, and I'll just go ahead and kind of mix it around a little bit. Just like that. A spatula usually works a little bit better because then you can just wipe it into the spot that you need it to. So just like that. And you just get a little bit on your spatula there. And then you'll go ahead and just kind of wipe it into the button. So just like that, making sure it's not getting everywhere, but you're getting enough on there to where it's gonna stick. And then same thing, you just want to squish it into the right spot and making sure you're getting directly on that dot. All right, and then the same thing, you're just gonna wanna let it set for a few minutes until it's kind of mushy almost. You can still move it, but at least get the general setup on it. And then you can manipulate it as you need to. All right, so it's been quite a few minutes. I've let it set a little bit longer just because I put a little bit extra on there this time. So now they're both on there, and this one was the one we did first, so it's more in place, where this one still moves around a little bit. So this is the one you're gonna wanna manipulate to match this one. So at this point, I like to kind of make sure I hold that up a little bit, not moving it too much, but go and take your ruler and see far from the top of that button to the rim. See how far that is? And then measure to the other side and make sure it's the same distance. And that way you're gonna get more of an accurate look. So like that's a smidge low, so I'm just gonna push it up a little bit, but not by much. So that looks good there. And then we'll just let it set and make sure it's straight. And from this point, we're gonna make sure that it sets for probably about 20 minutes before we put the chain on. And that'll give it enough time to at least set into place, and it won't be moving after that. All right, so we have those on there. They've set up quite a bit. They're on there, not going anywhere. But do remember, it takes about 12 to 24 hours for a full cure time. All right, so go ahead and put your lid on, and this is kind of the test of it to see if you did a good placement. You can go ahead and attach your chains. Just be very careful that you don't pull off the buttons, because again, it still has to cure for that set time. It does rotate, so you can lift it up and then snap to the other side. So you'll look like this now. And that's how it's gonna hang on. At this time, don't just like hang from it because it's probably gonna fall off. Not fall off, but it'll probably move these slightly, and we don't wanna do that. So now that your lid's on, you should be able to lay it down like that, just gently with the lid on. If you can do that and it looks good still, then you did your placements correctly. If it's too low, then it'll kind of get caught on your lid when you're trying to lay it over. But this is how you make the designer purse tumblers with the chain on it. It's really cute. They come out really well. These, when they are set, they're actually really durable. Still hand washing. You still don't want to run it through a dishwasher, just to preserve the looks of it and the chain. All right, so there you go, the final product. If you guys enjoyed this video, if you had fun making it, go ahead and boop that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share for others so they can get helped as well. Have a wonderful day and happy crafting.